She faked having cancer and received $100,000 in donations. On October 2012, 37-year-old Amanda Reilly started a blog to talk about a recent diagnosis of lymphoma cancer. Immediately, people wanted to help her out, so they started sending her donations to cover her medical expenses. But in reality, Amanda did not have cancer, and she was using this money to pay for her lifestyle. She was able to raise more than $100,000 in a span of 7 years, and she even shaved her head to make it look more convincing. She posted photos of herself and spoke about her treatment, and she even went about faking medical documents to make it all seem real. She was able to convince her family and friends that she had cancer, and she even went as far as to sue someone who questioned her diagnosis. But in 2019, Amanda was exposed when an anonymous tip was sent to an investigator, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Imagine picking up a hitchhiker only to discover later that he was wanted on murder charges and allegedly carrying his victim's severed head. A man in Georgia recently had the realization that he may have picked up a killer hitchhiker. Russell Jimerson was traveling with his son in the car at the time. A friend ended up informing Russell about the arrest of 23-year-old murder suspect Keegan Phillips. Now, disturbingly, Russell had actually noticed that the hitchhiker had a backpack that smelt disgusting. He's now coming to terms with the fact that a severed head may have been in that bag. Keegan Phillips, who is pictured here, has since been arrested, and police dogs also found human remains in a shallow grave. Police believe that it was the body of Martha Ledford, who was reported missing several days prior. Also arrested is Robert Bob Peppers. He's a 62-year-old man who has been arrested for dumping a dead body.
Videos that seem innocent but have a terrifying backstory. This video shows a man playing Dance Dance Revolution being unknowingly recorded by some people who are making fun of him. The man, Adam Lanza, 6 months later would shoot his mother in the head 4 times while she was asleep and then drive to Sandy Hook Elementary School, where he would murder 6 adults and 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7. A popular 18-year-old CSGO YouTuber uploaded a reveal of the supercar he had just bought. He had a stream account containing around $100,000 of in-game items, which was banned 6 months later, causing him to have a mental breakdown and commit suicide. He intentionally drove the vehicle into a van, killing him, a mother, and her 12-year-old daughter. This video shows comic magician Tommy Cooper having a heart attack on live TV. His audience, along with the assistant, thought it was all part of the show, so they laughed along while he died on stage. This video shows a Russian influencer's birthday party where she decided to throw dry ice into her swimming pool for the visual effect. Sadly, 3 people died due to carbon dioxide poisoning.
Remember this man of Family Feud? He joked that he regretted marrying his wife, and he was then accused of her murder. If you haven't seen my previous video, click this comment and watch the original video. Well, we now have an update in this case. In June, Tim was actually convicted of killing his wife. Rebecca Bleefnick was found deceased in February 2023 in her home in Quincy. She was a mum to 3 young boys. Now, Tim had filed for divorce in 2021 and had attacked Rebecca in a jealous rage after seeing another man's car on her drive on Valentine's Day. He ended up going home and searching for the number plate on his computer. The car actually belonged to Ted Johnson, Rebecca's new boyfriend. Tim then returned to Rebecca's house 9 days later and shot her 14 times at close range. Authorities actually found internet searches on Tim's computer of how to break into a window with a crowbar and how to create a homemade silencer. On Friday, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences.
I was the most famous female wrestler in the WWE, but what I did shocked the entire world. My life was never the same after that horrific act. My name is Tamara Lynn Sitch, commonly recognized by my wrestling alias, Sunny. I gained prominence in WWE not just for my appearance, but also for my exceptional fighting ability. After a successful career, I was honored with an induction into the WWE Hall of Fame. Life seemed perfect. However, in 2022, as I turned 50, I made a grave mistake. After an evening of celebration and drinking, I chose to drive while not being in a clear state of mind. Tragically, I collided with an elderly man's car at a traffic light, causing his immediate death and injuring 4 others. What's even more distressing is that this wasn't my first offense. I had been charged with DUI 6 times prior to this. Many wondered why I hadn't faced severe consequences earlier, or why I still possessed a driving license. Eventually, I faced trial and received a 25-year prison sentence. Had I been reprimanded earlier, this catastrophe might have been averted, and a life would have been spared. Follow me for more stories.
How far would you really go just to be with your boyfriend or girlfriend? In 2009, 47-year-old Joanne Witt reported to police that her 14-year-old daughter, Tyler, was in a relationship with a 19-year-old named Stephen Culver. But before anything could be done, Joanne's body was found laying on her bed in her home with 20 stab wounds. Investigators later learned that Stephen had been living in Joanne's house after Tyler asked her mother if he could rent a room in their house, and she convinced her mom that they were just friends. But not long after, when Joanne realized that there was more going on between her underage daughter and Stephen, she reported it to police, hoping to keep Stephen away from her daughter. Unfortunately, things took a turn, and on June 11th, 2009, Joanne was found deceased in her home after she kicked Stephen out. Police could not find both teens, so they had a feeling that they had something to do with Joanne's murder. But a few days later, they were eventually found 115 miles away behind a shopping mall. Investigators believe that Tyler let Stephen in the house in the middle of the night and watched as he murdered her mother. Tyler was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 15 years, so that means that next year she can possibly get out. And Stephen was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
From a Power Ranger star to a life sentence and then choosing to transition. My life's been a roller coaster, but most people don't know the disturbing acts I committed on 2 innocent people. Let me share a story that most don't know. You're going to be shocked. My name is Skylar DeLeon, and I'm about to share my tale. Many recognized me as the Red Ranger from Power Rangers. To the world, I appeared upright, but beneath that facade, there was a darker side. One day I stumbled upon a boat sale advertisement. Intrigued, I reached out to the owners, Thomas and Jackie, suggesting a test ride before making a decision. They were welcoming and agreed. When the day came, I introduced my companions as potential boat crew, hiding the fact that they had criminal pasts. The journey began pleasantly, with Thomas and Jackie offering valuable boating advice. But as we ventured deeper into the sea, the situation took a grim turn. My crew and I cornered them, demanding they transfer the boat's ownership or face dire consequences. Under duress, they complied. But after securing the boat, I made a chilling decision, binding them to the anchor and casting it into the abyss. Their demise would have remained a secret if not for a betrayal from my crew and Jackie's clever ruse. She intentionally misspelled her name on the transfer papers, raising police suspicions. Now, I'm serving a life sentence, and during my time behind bars, I've transitioned to a woman. Stay tuned for more revelations.
This one is such a sad, horrific story. Trigger warning, some of the details are quite hard to listen to. This poor boy suffered terribly in the months leading up to his death. Jordan lived in Leeds with his mum, grandma and sister. Social services were involved briefly when Jordan was younger, as a social worker deemed it necessary to step in and offer some support. A primary school report stated that there was a general lack of Jordan's basic needs. He had a lack of toilet training, he had black teeth, and very little language skills. However, his mum Dawn pulled him out of school just after primary school and before he entered high school, and he became increasingly reclusive. There were visits to check on Jordan's homeschooling situation, and Dawn was encouraged to put Jordan back in school, as there was no adequate workspace for him in the home. But Dawn refused, and eventually there was very little involvement with social services, and it seems that Jordan was just kind of forgotten about. Jordan eventually became a complete recluse, having no contact with the outside world. And on June 30th, 2016, when he was just 18 years old, he suffered a cardiac arrest at home. Paramedics found Jordan on a blow-up mattress in the living room, completely unresponsive. He weighed just 5 stone 11 pounds and was likened to that of a concentration camp victim. He had sores and ulcers, some of which went down to the bone, and he was wearing a soiled nappy. Paramedics attempted CPR while the family watched completely emotionless. In fact, his mother Dawn said that his collapse was a blessing as she wouldn't have to go to work that day. And the first thing she said to police when they arrived was, "How much is the funeral going to cost?" If that's not all shocking enough, police also discovered the dead body of a baby in a rucksack stuffed on top of a wardrobe in Jordan's bedroom, and they estimated it had been there for around 14 years. It was discovered that Jordan had been malnourished for around 6 months, despite there being 3 fridges in the house piled with food. His mum, grandma and sister were all arrested and charged with manslaughter. They had literally allowed Jordan to rot to death on a blow-up mattress in the living room and failed to get him any medical help. It was actually discovered that Dawn had attended a medical appointment for herself a few months before Jordan's death, but had failed to mention her son's deteriorating health. They could have got him help if they'd wanted to, but they didn't. Jordan's mother Dawn was sentenced to 4 years for manslaughter, his grandmother Denise was sentenced to 3 years for manslaughter, and his sister Abigail was sentenced to 18 months for allowing his death. None of them showed any remorse for Jordan's death, and they were all released within 3 years of being sentenced. This case is just absolutely heartbreaking. Trigger warning, some of the details are quite graphic. This is 15-year-old Sebastian Kalinowski. In 2020, he'd recently moved from Poland, where he lived with his father, to Huddersfield in West Yorkshire to live with his mother Agnieszka and her partner Andrzej. What this couple did to this young boy is just absolutely horrific. From the moment he went to live with them, he was forced to call Andrzej Sir and was subjected to regular humiliating drills, which consisted of push-ups, press-ups, squats, and he was also regularly injected with needles that Andrzej had used himself to inject steroids. Despite the horrific abuse at home, Sebastian was described by his teachers at school as a model student. He was polite, well-mannered, his English was improving, and he'd made lots of new friends. They had no idea that he was being abused at home. On August 13th, 2021, just 3 weeks into the summer holidays, and only 10 months after he'd moved to England, paramedics were called to Sebastian's home, and they found him unconscious. He'd actually been out cold for hours before help was called. It soon became quite obvious that Sebastian had fallen ill due to untreated injuries. He had multiple broken ribs, which had been left untreated and caused sepsis. Sadly, it was too late to save him, and he died the same day. An investigation into Sebastian's death began, and CCTV was recovered from the house. Sebastian had been forced to live an absolute nightmare in this house for months on end. The CCTV was thought to have been set up by Andrzej as a way of controlling Sebastian, and it uncovered months of abuse. He had suffered so much at the hands of his mother and stepfather. Videos showed numerous incidents where Sebastian had been punched, kicked and stamped on. In one video, he was seen being whipped with an electrical cable and being repeatedly stabbed with needles. And at one point, his mother had picked him up by the neck and thrown him to the floor. He was also beaten with a bed slat and a broken chair leg. On the day of Sebastian's death, Andrzej was seen forcing food and drink into Sebastian's mouth, before stabbing him repeatedly with a needle in the thigh and groin. It was also clear in that video that Sebastian was incredibly weak and he was struggling for breath. Just hours later, he was dead. The evidence against these two monsters was absolutely overwhelming, but despite that, they both pleaded not guilty to murder. Agnieszka pleaded guilty to child cruelty and Andrzej pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Despite that, the jury found them both guilty after a 5-week trial at Leeds Crown Court, and they were both sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 39 years, plus 9 years for child cruelty.
A prime example of people I hate in this world. You think you know how it all works. You don't know jack shit.
This is Randy Stair, a YouTuber who was obsessed with Danny Phantom. And in 2017, he murdered 3 people in a supermarket before taking his own life. So Randy had been on YouTube for a long time before he died. His first channels were started around 2007, and he had a number of different channels that he managed and produced content for. But eventually, he would become obsessed with the character from Danny Phantom called Ember. And from that point on, he started a channel called Ember's Ghost Squad, where he would animate Danny Phantom characters, obviously including Ember. And he would even go on to tell people that he felt like the character of Ember was inside of him. So Randy always exhibited disturbing behavior. He took photos wearing the t-shirts that the Columbine shooters wore. And he had a documented obsession with weapons, murderers, killers, and crime stories. In an online journal at one point, Randy wrote down that the character of Ember, who he felt like talked to him, wanted him to kill. And on the evening of June 7th, 2017, Randy would upload his final video. This final video was disturbing. The video featured Randy's fictional alter ego Andrew Blaze and a female accomplice walking through the hallways of a high school, murdering people, destroying the school, and it even featured a prolonged monologue from Randy himself talking about the motivations for this video and why he hated the world so much. Then, in the early hours of the very next morning, Randy decided to bring this video concept into the real world. So Randy arrived at his late night shift at the Weiss supermarket at around 11 o'clock p.m. that evening. And slowly throughout his shift, he began to block the entrances and exits to the store, trapping people inside. At around midnight, 12:10 a.m. to be exact, Randy sent out a number of video files and links. These were basically his journals, his confession as to what he was about to do, and some unreleased materials that he had generated. He then proceeded to walk through the supermarket and murder everybody that he could. The 3 victims that died in the shooting ended up all being employees of the supermarket: 25-year-old Victoria Brong, 47-year-old Brian Hayes, and 63-year-old Terry Lee Sterling. All of these victims murdered at random by Randy. So this is a picture of Randy with the actual weapon that he used. He was super proud of owning this thing. And in a strange twist, he actually let somebody live. He walked up to the person who was listening to music on her headphones. Her name was Kristen Newell, and after he walked away and she continued to hear the gunshots, she ran outside, called the police. But before authorities arrived, Randy placed his weapon into his mouth and took his own life. This is definitely one of the most infamous cases to ever rock YouTube, and there's so much more to it. I just feel like I'd have to make a very long video to explain it. And obviously, this is a horrific tragedy and an example of art coming into the real world in a very disturbing and twisted way.
Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity, against all of you, all the animals. You are animals.
This is Elliot Rodger, and in 2014, he murdered 7 people and injured a further 13 in a rampage in California. So Elliot Rodger came from a very, very privileged upbringing. His family was wealthy, they traveled all the time, and his dad was actually Hollywood famous. This is Elliot's father, Peter Rodger, and he was heavily involved in the Hollywood film industry. He was actually a second unit director on the Hunger Games film franchise. But at some point along the way, Elliot just descended down a path of darkness. So somewhere along the way, Elliot started a YouTube channel where he would post rants about how much he despised society and how unhappy he was in his life. His family knew that Elliot had mental health problems, but at the age of 18, when he was completely autonomous and free, he declined mental health services, and that's when his spiral really grew out of control. So allegedly, Elliot did a number of concerning things that led up to the massacre. At one point, he threw hot coffee on a couple on the street that he was jealous of. He also claims he threw hot coffee on 2 girls for not smiling at him. And he even claimed that he filled a super soaker full of orange juice and sprayed it at kids playing ball in the park just because. Then, at a party in July of 2013, Elliot tried to murder 2 girls who rejected his advances by pushing them off of a tall ledge. But after seeing this, these other men at the party came over and instead pushed Elliot off the ledge. This led him to sustain some injuries, his sunglasses were broken, and when he came back to grab his stuff, everybody at this party mocked him and laughed at him. Now, it's a well-known fact of this case that Elliot Rodger was a self-proclaimed incel. He was a part of the community where he just hated women, and he also hated men. And in April of the year 2014, only a month or so before the massacre, Elliot's parents actually contacted authorities because of his concerning posts on YouTube and on the internet. But they said that they couldn't do anything. So May 23rd, 2014, Elliot just snaps. And on that day, he murders his 3 roommates and even stabs his last roommate 94 times. Afterwards, Elliot drove to a coffee shop and purchased a cup of coffee. And that's when he uploaded his retribution video that I showed a clip from at the beginning of this TikTok. This was also the time when he sent out his manifesto. This manifesto was over 107,000 words long and was basically a twisted version of Elliot's life story that described everything he hated about the world. Elliot's therapist saw the YouTube video almost as soon as it was posted and phoned Elliot's parents. And they both got into their cars and started heading towards Santa Barbara, where Elliot was located. But it was too late. Elliot then got into his car and started driving and headed to the Alpha Phi sorority house at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He knocked on the door, no one answered, and after seeing this, he started opening fire on anyone he could see. 2 young women were shot and killed in the area, and he then took off again in his car. While in his car, Elliot pulled up to a coffee shop and fired some shots through the window, but no one was injured or killed. And he then opened fire into a delicatessen where a man who was sitting inside was shot 7 times and killed on the scene. Elliot then took off driving again, this time on the wrong side of the street. He struck a pedestrian with his car, opened fire on 2 people that were walking on the sidewalk. He shot at a female cyclist. He shot at 2 people exiting a pizza shop. Basically, this guy was just committing a massacre all across the city of Santa Barbara. At this point, a sheriff's deputy caught up to Elliot and started opening fire. Elliot exchanged fire with the man, then took off again in his car, and afterwards rammed into a further 2 pedestrians with his vehicle. He then opened fire on 3 people that were walking on the street. All 3 of them were wounded, and afterwards he ran into a skateboarder and 2 cyclists with his vehicle. But at this point, the police were catching up with Elliot. They finally cornered him again. They started opening fire, but he sped off. And at this point, he struck another cyclist before crashing his car, and when sheriff's deputies finally went up to the vehicle, they found that Elliot had taken his own life. I remember this happening. This was huge news, and this is just such a disturbing and twisted story. And his manifesto, which was widely reported on by the news, is one of the most disturbing things I think I've ever read. I mean, you can tell that this guy really just hated everything and everybody on the planet.
Imagine getting arrested for having a child with a dead body. Jennifer Burrows is a 26-year-old who was working at a morgue when she was arrested after a DNA test proved her child's father was a dead body she was supposed to autopsy. But it actually gets worse from here, because while Jennifer was working as an assistant pathologist at the morgue, she had relations with more than 60 bodies, belonging to men aged 17 to 71 years old. She did this for 2 years until it led to the birth of her son. Her son's father was a 57-year-old veterinarian from Texas, who passed away in a car accident in 2017. Jennifer was charged with 158 counts of indecent treatment of a corpse. Many psychologists and experts have debated why someone would do this. The reasons range from curiosity to severe mental illness. Some even believe Jennifer was suffering from psychosis. Alright, after all that, I don't really know how to end this video, so stay safe out there and follow for more.
This is by far one of the weirdest cults that I've ever researched before. So in the 1920s in LA, May Otis Blackburn and her daughter Ruth started this cult called the Great 11 Club, and it was entirely run by women. They said that they were contacted by 2 angels and were told they needed to write a book revealing all the secrets about the universe. They also believed that once the apocalypse happened, 11 queens would rule the world from Hollywood mansions. Honestly, sounds like a good time to me. So this is May's stepbrother and husband, Ward. He really contributes nothing to the story except that he was a pedophile and has 5-inch fingernails. For the most part, it was just a money laundering scheme, but they did call this thing the Light of God, and like now that we're worshiping cats, I'm down. Eventually though, shit did get really weird because they started sacrificing animals and then kept a dead girl in a bathtub for 3 years. Check out episode 61 for more info.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
After my husband died in a car accident, my child always went to the playground in the middle of the night, saying he wanted to see his father. I secretly followed him. I was shocked to else saw the truth. What's going on here? Let me tell you slowly. My husband and I got married 5 years ago. We had a wholesale curtain business in our hometown. Then we sold them to people in the backward mountainous areas. And earned some installation fees, by the way. Although we're always on the move. But we're both satisfied. When we had a child, I stayed home to take care of the kid. And my husband went out to do business alone. Luckily, he wasn't far from home. He could come home a few times a week. Just when our little family was looking forward to a better life, an accident happened. My husband was in a car accident while selling curtains. He was burned alive on the spot. Every night since then, I've been crying silently thinking of my husband. My body became thinner and thinner. I couldn't even take care of my 3-year-old son. So I sent him to a private school. He only comes home once every half month. Seeing me like this, my parents offered to move in with me, to live with me. They took care of me. After about 3 months, I suddenly got a call from my kindergarten teacher. The teacher told me, "Your son has been acting strange at school lately. He often wakes up at night and goes to the playground." He didn't know who he was playing with. I asked your son who he was playing with. I didn't expect him to say happily, "Dad. But I know your husband passed away 3 months ago. So I'd like you to come and see him. I'm afraid the child can't bear the pain of losing his father. He'll become mentally ill." I was horrified. I told her I'd go tomorrow. The next evening, I came to school and played with my son for a while. Then I put him to bed. I pretended to be asleep myself. A little while later, my son realized that his mother was asleep. He secretly got up and went downstairs to the playground. I followed him closely. I followed him to the playground. The light on the playground was foggy. I saw him running towards a man. Who was this man?
You will not believe this insane plot twist. In 2008, Carolyn Watson and Julian Butchwald were a young religious couple. They were living in Melbourne, Australia, and had been together around 2 years. Julian was driving the pair to a picnic date in the car, but he actually stopped the car suddenly, noticing an animal on the side of the road. Suddenly, something horrific happened. Carolyn's vision went completely black after being blindfolded by a terrifying masked man. All she could work out was she was being stripped off and thrown into a vehicle. The car finally stopped and she took her blindfold off, and she was really relieved to see that her boyfriend was by her side. He'd also been stripped off and the couple were completely in the middle of nowhere. The pair managed to untie themselves, but were having to just wander around aimlessly for a week, trying to find safety. Meanwhile, police were desperately searching for the couple. Family and friends were really concerned, and they knew how out of character this was for the pair to go missing. They sent out air and water search teams, but just couldn't locate the couple. As the missing pair were very religious, they'd actually vowed to be celibate until marriage, but Julian started to suggest that it might be a good idea to break this celibacy in order to keep them warm. Finally, a local farmer found the couple and alerted police. However, they quickly found that the story didn't really add up. Julian soon confessed to police that he'd actually made the whole thing up and he'd staged the kidnapping. His motive was purely to try and get his girlfriend to break their vow of celibacy.